Hey guys, my name is Ryan, welcome to Overwatch Central and welcome to another Master Guide, this time going over McCree. Now, I know what you're thinking, you're going to go down QD or Timey, whoever else. And we're going to kind of go over that in a second. But as per usual, let us know in the comments below what hero you would like us to cover next, and ideally who you would like us to go over it with. So I can already imagine some of the comments ioStux when it comes to maybe not getting QD or Timey or other pro McCrees to talk about McCree in particular. You are a GM player, you're also a coach, but just sort of in your own words, why should people listen to you when it comes to playing one of the hardest heroes in Overwatch?
Well, players like IDDQD, Taimu, and AKM are excellent players. They have lightning-fast decision-making, impeccable mechanics, great teamwork as well. But what they don't have is the experience of watching hundreds of VODs and knowing how a variety of players play. Anything from bronze to top 50 in the world. As a coach, I have that experience, and I hope that I can share some of that with you today.
So at the start of Master Guides, we usually ask the person we're talking to why to play that specific hero. McCree's an interesting one, and I'd like you to highlight for Season 4 at this point in time that this video is made, why should you play McCree?
Well, in my opinion, McCree is kind of like Tracer in that he demands a lot from you and he really challenges you as a character in all aspects of play. Movement, positioning, aim, and game sense. And in my opinion, learning McCree is worthwhile for everyone because the skills that you practice playing him transfer greatly to all characters. Now, obviously the biggest kind of argument is that why play McCree when we have Soldier? And that's a fair opinion, and you know, it's based on a lot of facts, but in my opinion there are still a few reasons why you should pick him.
What kind of situations would you pick McCree then? Like, oh, that was basically the next question, like why play McCree when Soldier's on? We see a lot of McCree being played alongside a Soldier, but what situations would you pick a McCree over a Soldier?
Okay, so for one, McCree's burst damage compared to Soldier really comes in handy when you play against squishier comps. Now, especially with Season 3 and even the start of Season 4, the primary comps were still, you know, triple tank, quad tank, really very beefy comps, where McCree's burst damage didn't really shine a lot. The more consistent damage that Soldier could offer was a lot better. But in my opinion, if you play against a double or maybe even a triple DPS comp, especially on maps, you know, King of the Hill maps, there he can really shine. And one thing that not a lot of people think about, McCree is really, really good on closed maps, so like Nepal Sanctum or Oasis University, because he tends to stay in his effective range a lot, which means that one of the biggest weaknesses comparing him to Soldier, being his fall-off damage, aren't as strong. And if you're playing against a Pharah in these very tight, closed areas, he can also excel a lot more compared to Soldier, whereas on very open maps like, for example, Dorado Streets Phase or Hollywood Streets Phase, Soldier tends to shine a lot more because especially characters like Pharah or even the enemy backline tends to stay a lot further away. So the fact that, you know, Soldier's fall-off range is a lot longer kind of helps him in those situations.
Another common reason why McCree's sort of brought into a team is to deal with Pharahs, who seem to be like the big problem hero of Season 4 across all of it. Again, would you pick McCree over Soldier in that specific scenario? And are there any other situations where you go, actually no, McCree is worth it here? For countering heroes mostly.
Well, compared to Soldier, McCree can actually deal with a Pharah Mercy. If you can consistently land headshots on the Pharah, then she'll die before Mercy has time to heal her up. However, that also requires you to get really, really close to Pharah. McCree is kind of a lot more risky to play than Soldier. However, he can deal with Pharah in a variety of situations, whereas Soldier really needs to, you know, rely on them not running a far Mercy, or the Mercy being kind of distracted with something else at the moment.
A major question that people have when it comes to McCree is, how do you aim better? Like, how do you sort of approach getting better at accuracy? And this is a whole topic in itself, but I certainly wanted to hear what you have when it comes to improving aim on heroes like Soldier and like McCree as well.
Well, with McCree there are two obvious ways that you can aim. You can either like focus on flicking or you can focus on tracking. Now, keep in mind that tracking with McCree isn't the same as tracking with like Soldier or Zarya. It's more of a generally follow the target and then make one small flick instead of one big flick. You know, Taimu likes those big flicks, although that is mainly because of his gaming background and a lot of experience. IDDQD prefers the tracking approach. It really comes down to what works for you. I would recommend trying out both and seeing what works. as up until last season, I was actually a pure flick McCree, very similar to the way Taimo plays. And I was really scared of losing my muscle memory by tracking. But now that I tried out tracking, I tend to play a lot more consistent. And the skills that I practice help me a lot on other characters like Tracer, for example. Now, in order to get better aim, it's really, really important that you challenge yourself. You know, you don't build muscles lifting 50-gram weights all day. If you're flashbanging a Tracer, for example, always go for that headshot, even if you feel that, you know, your headshots are kind of inconsistent. Even if you miss the headshot, it's a mistake that you can learn from, and it's the only way to practice. Whereas if you always, you know, go for fan the hammer, or you instead of going for headshots, you always aim for the body, sure, your accuracy will go up in terms of the stat, but your actual aim will never improve because you never challenge yourself.
So if we were to go over some training drills now, say if we got some footage on screen, how could you practice your aim?
Okay, so there's a pretty big difference between warming up and practicing. It's actually something that I like to mention in my coaching sessions. And that warm up is not permanent. You need to always warm up every day, sometimes multiple times a day, in order to really get going. Whereas if you practice something, that's something that's permanent. Now, you're asking for drills. What a lot of people do is, you know, we obviously have the Ana bot training, where you limit her to only being able to receive headshots since she can't hit you. And that's a really good way to kind of warm up. However, I want people to know that shooting bots, while being really, really good warm-up, doesn't really add much to your muscle memory. While, you know, the only thing that you're practicing is shooting bots in the end. And no matter how good Blizzard programs them, their movement will be predictable. Now, in my opinion, the by far best way to practice your aim is by playing against real people. Now, obviously, if you don't have any friends who can help you with that, playing a couple of rounds of quick play before competitive can help, you know, a lot. But one thing that I like to do, and actually a friend of yours, Mr. Numis, shared with me, was going into a custom game. And, you know, both players pick McCree, and you actually ramp the movement speed up. And you just try to duel each other. Now, the amazing thing about this kind of practice is that, for one, you play against an actual human being, which means that, you know, it's actual practice that will help you in game. And since you increase the movement speed, it becomes a lot more difficult. And kind of the premise with this is, you know, if you can hit another McCree at 200% movement speed and you go back to the regular movement speed in game, it'll feel a lot easier. And again, since you're playing against a real human being, all of that muscle memory is completely dynamic. You aren't just predicting where people are walking along, but you learn how to react to that. And in the long run, that's what gives you good aim, not shooting Ana bots all day long.
So we'll go over sort of ability tips now. He is very much a finesse hero, McCree. There's a lot there with the flashbang, the roll, and of course the fan, the hammer. The sort of main thing to go over is that you only sort of get one opportunity with these abilities. If your abilities are on cooldown, then you could be in a lot of trouble. So what's the best way, going through them, what tips have you got, and what common mistakes do you see when it comes to McCree's kit?
Fan the hammer is kind of simple. It's generally only good on targets that can't be headshot or where you don't want to risk missing a headshot. To be honest, I personally use Fan the hammer only to break Reinhardt shields or Winston bubbles, or maybe to finish off hard to hit targets, like when I flashbang a Genji mid-air and it can be hard to land a headshot. Fan the hammer is kind of a lazy ability, and as I mentioned earlier, if you can go for the headshot, you really, really should, because again, maybe you'll miss it, but eventually you learn how to hit it consistently. With McCree's flashbang, it's important to not force plays all the time, especially on defense. I always see people combat roll towards a Ryan shield just to flash over it, but that's way too risky most of the time, and you need follow-up. For example, a Rotor Cook or Zarya bubbles to protect you. In lower ranks it works fine, but the higher you go, the more careful you need to be about using your roll offensively. This isn't so relevant at the moment, but in case, you know, the enemies have a Reaper, for example, then it's pretty important that you save your flashbang for him almost 100% of the time. It's better to always expect it than to be surprised by it and not having your flash available to you. One interesting use of the flashbang that I don't see a lot of people use is it actually deals 25 damage, which can be really helpful if you are reloading and the enemy is running towards a health pack. For me personally, it secured me quite a lot of kills actually, once I started to not only think of it as an ability to stun someone, but also as a melee attack with range on it. Now, His combat roll, the only reason I use it is to reload. In my opinion, the mobility it gives you is negligible, and you can't really do anything after you press the button since you're kind of locked into that animation. Obviously, you can do the regular fan the hammer, use your roll to reload, fan the hammer combo, although I prefer using it in the middle of a duel to save some time reloading. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the biggest mistakes I see players do is to combat roll into an enemy to flashbang them. While it can lead to a kill, you used your only movement ability, and that leaves you very, very vulnerable.
Okay, now, one of the first things that me and you talked about when it came to McCree prior to this was practicing a certain aspect of his kit, and that was McCree's ultimate. Now, gone are the days that people could sort of get 4 or 5 kills with the Deadeye. It becomes much harder to use now that the ult usage goes down to 0% instead of 50 when cancelled. So how should people be using Deadeye from now on?
Basically, exactly just like you mentioned it. The most important part about McCree's ultimate is that you need to realize it's not a big team-wide ultimate that Monta just wants you to believe it to be. Sure, if you combo it with a graviton or you use it while standing behind the enemies without them noticing you, you can get a lot of kills, but that's not how the ability works at all in higher ranks. What I always tell my coaches is to imagine one enemy rage quitting and then kind of thinking about your chances of winning. And, winning a 6v5 is usually pretty easy. And we can transfer that to using Deadeye and all of a sudden realize getting one pick with Deadeye is usually already enough to win a fight. So my most important tip with this ultimate is to just not get greedy with it. If you can get one kill, then that already gives your team a numbers advantage. So just go for it. His Deadeye is very easy to counter, especially with characters like D.Va, so you'll have a bad time in case you want to charge it for very long. Another pretty important thing about McCree's ultimate is that it continues to accumulate damage even after you lined up a kill shot. This becomes really important when you play against targets that have damage reduction, so right now we have Orisa's Fortify, Nano Boost, and Bastion's Ironclad passive, because those passives aren't calculated in his kind of visual during his ultimate, meaning that it can seem like the shot would kill, but then they end up surviving it because their damage reduction saved them. So if you're playing against those characters or you're kind of aiming at someone who is nano boosted, always make sure that you're charging it for a little extra, just to ensure that it actually kills your target. Now, my favorite way personally of using Deadeye that actually works pretty often is to use it while the entire enemy team stands behind the Reinhardt shield. Now, the shots can be blocked by Reinhardt's barrier, which is really important, as you can charge up your ultimate as long as possible, and then in the last second use it. The first few shots destroy the Rein shield, and the last shots kill their target. Even in higher ranks, people get caught off guard by this, and it's a pretty easy way to punish inexperienced players, especially right now, since, Soldier is kind of the main pick, so people don't have that much experience playing against McCree. One struggle a lot of players face are Genji deflects with his ultimate, and I have a little tip for that as well. Now, the reason that is because, for one, his deflect hitbox is actually kind of stupid, but the ability in of itself can really screw your Deadeye over. What you can do, however, is to adjust your view to get him out of your field of vision while keeping your targets in it. This means that Deadeye will only shoot at the targets you can see, and since you looked away from the Genji deflecting, he can't really do anything about it. This doesn't always work, but when it does, it can really turn fights around and save you a lot of embarrassing kill cams. Also, keep in mind that invulnerability doesn't stop your ultimate from charging up, meaning that Mercy Resurrects and Zenyatta ultimates can be abused by using your ultimate, charging it up while they are invulnerable, and then shooting. It's kind of risky, but with experience you get a feel for when to use this move.
McCree's in a really weird spot at the moment. We're seeing him in sort of drabs now and again, but it's in a sort of really precarious position for McCree in particular. Does he need changing, considering he's not really... what is his problem currently, I suppose?
Okay, changing McCree is incredibly, he's a very, very volatile character. The slightest change to him can completely break the game, because his skill ceiling and his skill gap is insanely large. You know, you have those really talented players who are just hitting headshot after headshot, and then you have the kind of regular players who are happy about hitting body shots. And if you buff him a little, then it can feel a lot better for those kind of inexperienced players only going for body shots. But when you give McCree to a professional player or a higher tier player who's hitting headshots, all of a sudden, the character just breaks the game. In my opinion, what I would hope for a change is definitely about his ultimate. Now, I need to be honest, I'm not a game designer, so I don't exactly know what, but currently, especially if you compare it to Soldier's tactical visor, his ultimate seems extremely, weak. Also, and this is actually something that a lot of pro players probably would agree with, I think that they should change his damage fall off a little. Now, not bring it up to kind of Soldier levels. I mean, we had that time actually where he could, two-shot people across the map. Not anything like that, but just maybe increasing it by like 3 to 5 meters would definitely help him out, especially in metas where Pharah is especially dominant, because then you could still use Soldier as that kind of, consistent shield buster and this really good nano boost target, but McCree alongside characters like Ana and Widowmaker would be the prime picks when dealing with a Far Mercy, for example.
Okay, so that sort of brings me on to the question then of what is McCree's problem currently? Why aren't we seeing him a lot at the moment? We're seeing him a bit more than before, but like, what is McCree's problem here? Why is he so difficult and such a difficult pick for competitive?
It's all about consistency, to be honest. If you look at Soldier, then you quickly start to realize that while McCree has some advantages over him, it's just not consistent enough. Now, if we would look at an ideal world where a McCree player would just consistently hit headshots all of the time, then McCree is the better pick over Soldier. Like, he just deals more burst damage and he can confirm a lot more kills than the Soldier. But sadly, that's not how it works. And even professional players can't play him to that sort of level. So why would you go for a high-risk character like McCree with an objectively worse ultimate than Soldier and a lot higher skill floor where, unless you're hitting consistent headshots, you aren't getting the most out of him, instead of a very consistent character like Soldier? It's a lot easier to hit your shots with him. He doesn't rely so much on headshots, and even then, since he's more focused on like continuous shots, it's a lot easier to hit headshots with him. And obviously in the current very Ana dominant meta, it's really important that you have a good nano boost target. And McCree sadly is not a good nano boost target, and he's also not a good character to combine with stuff like graviton surges, or because again it can be blocked by something like a D.Va defense matrix. If we just look at current meta comps, let's say we have something like an Ana Lucio support, Tracer Genji as DPS, and Zarya Reinhardt as the tanks, then you have a really good setup because you can nano boost the Genji and you can combine your graviton with the Tracer pulse bomb. But what we can do in this case is, obviously, we could replace the Genji with a Soldier, and we would still have that really good nano boost target. Whereas if we would replace him with a McCree, we would lose out on that, and all of a sudden our team fighting potential just got a lot worse. So let's say, okay, we can just replace the Tracer, but then we go into the situation of, why would I prefer the Deadeye to combine with my Graviton Surge if I can just use the Pulse Bomb, which can't be blocked by Mei wards, can't be blocked by Reinhardt barriers, and more importantly, can't be blocked by Defense Matrix? And obviously I know the Pulse Bomb in of itself can be blocked by the Defense Matrix, however the Explosion can't, and if Tracer blinks into the Graviton and just throws it on the ground, it's basically impossible for D.Va to consistently block it. But what I'm trying to focus on is that McCree is not a bad character. Okay, he's not, like, his numbers aren't weak or anything. His kit, while not the most interesting, also isn't really the biggest problem. His problem is just that other characters synergize a lot better with current meta picks, and their kits are just a lot more versatile and, most importantly, very consistent.
So at the end of these master guides, we usually ask sort of tips on how to improve overall. You are a coach yourself, so I guess the big question is, how do you improve at Overwatch? What is the best way? What is the best advice that you could give someone?
Well, generally, if you want to improve with any character, especially DPS or tank characters like McCree, Tracer, Zarya, You really need to play like an alpha male. You need to be as aggressive as possible. You need to take every duel you can. It's not going to help you climb or win games, but it allows you to get a lot of experience. With every duel you lose, you learn something new. With every aggressive flashbang or ultimate, you learn something new. You don't get good by standing behind a Reinhardt shield in your safe space all day. You get good testing your limits. Eventually you will learn what doesn't work, what could work, and what works consistently. Don't fan the hammer at Tracer after a flashbang because you are scared of missing the headshot. The only way to get better at hotshotting Tracers is to do it, and this applies for every single character. Don't hesitate about using graviton surges because you think the enemies might have a defensive against it. Don't hesitate to go for that earth shatter because you expect the enemy Reinhardt shield to drop all of a sudden. If there's even the slightest indicator that what you're doing could work, just go for it, because the worst case that could happen is that you make a mistake and you can learn from that mistake. And that's the only way to get good at this game. You need to fall down first in order to come back up.
And as well, you're not necessarily a content creator, you do make videos now and again, but where can people find you, and where can people find out more about your coaching as well?
Well, I have a YouTube channel, ioStux Coaching, where I have some videos that I really recommend you watch, especially the Getting Good series. It's kind of old, but the content is still very, very relevant, and it's kind of my number one recommendation for people who are, new to the game and kind of want to get a good foundation. And in case you are interested in coaching, I offer that on sandbox.gg. I have 3 different kind of sessions, one focused on a VOD review, one focused on assessing you as a player, and one focused on practicing mechanics with you. And hey, maybe I'll see you in the future.
And that's it for this time. Thank you very much for watching. Big shout out to ioStux. You can find all of his details in the comments below. Again, let us know which hero you would like us to cover next, and be sure to check out all of the other master guides that we've done in the past. But until next time, take care, and we'll see you then.